Welcome to Champion Minded, the podcast for those who aim for excellence, not only in the sports arena, but in life. My name is Allistair, author, speaker, mindset and performance coach, and my goal is to help you unleash your unlimited potential and provide you with the tools to achieve greatness. Are you ready to become champion minded? Then let's do this. Hey everyone, welcome to the Champion Minded podcast, or welcome back to it. I'm Allistair McCaw. In this episode, I have communications specialist and consultant, Jenny Rearick. Now guys, I'm sure you'll agree with me that communication is probably one of the most important things in life. It determines our relationships, it determines how we do business, it determines our friendships. Communication is the key, I believe, to success and of course happiness, especially when it comes to relationships as well. But in this conversation with Jenny, we get into what defines communication, what the traits are of a good communicator, what poor communication looks like. We also talk about professionalism, especially in the health and fitness industry, which Jenny does a lot of work in as well, consulting. Also talk about things like emails and phone calls and text messages and so on and so forth. Jenny gives us ways of how you can improve your communication skills there. And obviously with virtual coaching as well, which she does, how we can do better in that particular area as well. I know for one thing, I obviously speak a lot in my business, and I will definitely be using her skills as well with regards to becoming an even better communicator, because like I said, communication is the key. So guys, I know you'll enjoy this one. I know you'll get a lot out of it. Get pen and paper. This is Jenny Rearick. Hi Jenny, welcome to the Champion Minded podcast.
Hi Allistair, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on.
Yeah, thanks so much for taking the time. Let's start off. How's it been for you during this time with COVID-19?
Surprisingly, it is going really well. Part of what I do is I work for a communications company, and we train corporate professionals. So this is outside of the work that I'm doing in the fitness and sport industry. But we have been pushed into a place where we've essentially been forced to deliver virtual and e-learning courses. And that's not something that we had anticipated ever doing. And it's been a positive because we're not losing clients, and we're able to adjust and help them keep their employees engaged as they're working from home and whatnot. And then personally, I've had the time, as you and I have talked about, to do some personal projects and spend time working on those, time that I likely would not have had if this had not happened. And so I'm trying to keep an eye on the bright side.
Yeah. Now, as we were just discussing just before we got on the call now, was the fact it's been a positive time of having more time to do projects, having more time to read, research, and that's where I really came across you as well, because I absolutely love your Twitter feed.
Thank you.
And let me just give your address out there now. Your Twitter is Jenny_Rearick. That's Rearick, guys. You've got to definitely follow Jenny, because I absolutely love your stuff, and I'm all about communication. I'm all about wanting to learn more about it, and I just thought, you know what, it would be great to get you on the podcast and just listen to some advice and obviously pick your brain on that as well. So, Jenny, if you wouldn't mind just giving just a brief introduction of yourself.
Sure. I am based in the San Francisco Bay Area. This communications role is somewhat new. It's been a part of my life for a very long time, but in a professional sense, it is just new over the last 3 or 4 years. Prior to that, I was in marketing and advertising as a project manager, and I learned very early on in my career in that role that I needed to be flexible in the way I was communicating, because I was having to essentially be the glue to a team where everyone had competing priorities. And my ability to adapt in those situations is what made me successful. And long story short, it was through a very random connection. The timing was uncanny, but I was offered this role to do more of a corporate training, teaching people how to speak and write in a business setting. I took it and I absolutely loved it, and I realized that it really felt like a calling to me, because I personally value conversation and communication very deeply because I've seen it impact my life. And so I thought, why not pursue this role? And now my mission is to help people understand what it means to develop communication skills, because I think a lot of communication information out there is not specific, and it's almost the people who are preaching about it keep it at a distance where you don't necessarily get the feeling like you're going to be able to actually improve. And so what I'm trying to do is put out information that is easy to act on and that anyone can understand, because communication is not difficult. And I want people to stop feeling intimidated by it, because I think a lot of the other people who are preaching about communication make it feel like it's an intimidating endeavor.
Okay, so let's start here. How would you define effective communication, or what does a great communicator look like? What are some of the traits?
Yeah, I think effective communication is a buzzword, and yet it's so rarely defined. And so simply stated, it's when your message, in whatever form that might be, is received, which means it's understood and acted on in the way that you intend it to be received. And so to communicate effectively, there need to be a few things present. And these, I would say, are the parts of the whole. One is intentional physical and vocal delivery skills, meaning your body language and the tone in your voice, the pace at which you speak are congruent with the message that you're sharing. The second piece is that you have a well-constructed message. Your information is organized in a way that prioritizes the receiver of the message that you're communicating with. And then the third is that you have an ability to interact productively after you share your message with the person that you're sharing it with. And so you have the ability to answer questions, to clarify points, and to make adjustments based on how you see the other person responding to your message.
One of the key words you mentioned there was tone. And of course, if you've been in a relationship, or you actually don't even have to be in a relationship, but using our tone of voice can get us in trouble, right? We can say two of the same messages, but one can be with the wrong tone, and it can be brought across in the wrong way. So how important is tone?
You're spot on with that. People will always believe our tone over the actual words we are saying. And that's an evolutionary thing. I mean, we can't help that. But when there's incongruency between the words that we're saying and the tone that we're using, people know that, and we can read that very easily. And so it's a skill for both the receiver and the communicator. If you're somebody who I would say is maybe more passive, and you maybe have a disinterested or a harsh tone, but you're communicating what would be considered a positive message, I think the work that needs to be done there is being able to develop your ability to assertively communicate and ask and say what you need. And then on the flip side, if you're somebody who interacts with people who don't manage their tone well, and you feel that lack of congruency between their message and their tone, we need to allow ourselves to step beyond that and just see it as an invitation to dig deeper and to ask them what's really going on.
Jenny, how would one improve their communication skills? I mean, is it would you have to go on a course, or would you if someone's listening to this right now and saying, okay, I know I need to improve my communication, where would they go? What would they do? What would the steps be?
The main path that I see most people take, especially in the fitness and sport industry, and this is in line with, I think, how a lot of extracurricular learning goes on, it starts with reading books. But the issue with reading books, and they have their place, but the issue with reading books is that you're simply consuming knowledge and you're not practicing any skills. And communication skills are a behavioral skill set at their core. You could read all of the books in the world, but if you never put anything into practice in scenarios and get some active coaching on that application, you're not going to see the type of improvement that you could. And so we need to be able, or put ourselves in situations where we can deliberately practice. A lot of us are in this place where I would call us unconsciously competent. And that means that some days your communication goes really well, and other days it seems that nothing you're saying is working. And that's a good place to be, because that means that you have the capability to be an effective communicator, but you have yet to figure out what levers you need to pull to make it happen when you want it to happen. And so what I like about working now with fitness and sport professionals is that they understand the idea of building up or developing component parts as a way to improve on the whole system. And so I would recommend, if you want to improve your communication skills, take a course or get a coach. They have courses online, but if you really want to get better, work with someone who's going to get you up and moving and doing things, and that will actively coach you. And this is the same if you were going to go and find a trainer or a sport coach. That's the type of coach you're looking for there as well. And there's a lot of similarities between the two. Someone who's going to help you develop physical and vocal skills, someone who will teach you how to structure your content. When I say content, that sounds formal, but simply that means what it is you want to say, and structuring it in a way that makes sense for people, how to deliver your content, and then again, how to actually interact with people, because communication isn't us just talking. It's our ability to then be able to have interactions to develop the ideas we share with the people we're communicating with. And if it's okay, I'd like to talk through what I'm calling a 3-step iterative process that outlines essentially how someone would go about tactically to improve their communication skills. The first is to establish a baseline. So in order to improve on your communication skills, you need to know what areas you're looking to improve on. An analogy that I really like is I'm also an educator for Certified Functional Strength Coach, and Michael Boyle and the staff over at NBSC talk a lot about filling buckets. And they talk about it in a training perspective. So if there's strength, power, conditioning, when an athlete comes to see you, you have to evaluate what buckets need to be filled and what buckets might be overflowing that you don't need to spend as much time on. And the same would go for communication. Once you have a baseline assessment, which for me, when I work with people, is usually a video recording of them speaking, I then evaluate where do we really want to spend the time, because not everyone needs to improve everything about their communication skills. So step one is establish a baseline. Once you have that and you understand from an objective standpoint where your skills actually are and which need to be developed, you're only going to want to pick one, maybe two things to work on actively improving.
So, Jenny, if I could just come in there, what would be an example of maybe someone speaking too fast or too slowly or at one tone? What would be an example of focusing on one particular area?
Mm-hmm. So if you had sent me a recording as a communications coach, what I would look at first is what I call presence. And presence to me is defined in 6 areas. There's the physical and then the vocal. On the physical side, it's what your eyes are doing and your eye contact. Mm-hmm. Then we have your hands. So what your hands are doing when you're not gesturing, and then when you are gesturing, what are they telling us? The third physical element would be your posture or your stance. So if you are in this scenario, if you are standing or seated and you're saying something, how are you standing or sitting? And are you moving? And what is the intention of your movement? On the vocal side, it's your volume, inflection or tone, and then the rate of your speech, and also filler words. So all of those things are individual levers that you can pull and improve upon, because there is a most effective way to use all of those physical and vocal skills. We just need to help people understand what it means to use them well. And most of us have never been taught those things. I didn't take a communications course in all of my schooling, and it wasn't until very late in my 20s that I took a communications development course.
No, that's incredibly interesting, because I mean that is something I would say over the last 10 years that I've paid more attention to, and I present a lot as well, and obviously like to get feedback on how I'm presenting and so on and so forth. And one of the mistakes I made earlier in my career, and I had to work on that, was speaking too quickly. Because you get up there, you're excited, you're sharing everything and you're going at 100 miles per hour, but nobody can really pick up what you're talking about. And that was a particular area I had to go to work on. And I would ask some people after the presentation, how was my tone, how was my speed of how I was talking, and so on and so forth. So just like you said there, just one or two things first of all. It's almost like giving advice to an athlete before they go out and compete. If you give them more than I always say, two things is enough to work on. If you give them six things, well, good luck with that. It just becomes confusing and daunting, so to say. I think I jumped in there while you were busy. I think you were you were going on to number 3 in there.
Right, and to touch on what you said, you're right. If you chase 2 rabbits, you catch no rabbits. And so once you've identified areas that you want to improve, you want to pick 1 or 2 things and no more. And it's important to know that when you do go to work on improving those things, I don't generally tell people to do that in a performance setting. So I wouldn't say to you, Allistair, why don't you work on those things the next time you're up on stage giving a keynote? These are things that need to be developed in practice settings, that they're safe, you're isolated, and you can, as I just said, isolate the skill for it to be practiced on its own, because the goal is to develop these individual parts that will lead to an improved whole, which is your communication package. So you identify 1 or 2 things, you work on them. You then go back and you refilm yourself communicating. Maybe that's coaching a class or coaching a sports practice. You refilm, and then you look for the next 1 or 2 things. And so you do that iteratively. And then once you feel like you've got those parts developed, which is step number 3, then you get to put them together and play them out in a performance setting. So it's game time, right? You've practiced, or you had your preseason for 2 or 3 weeks. You develop the skills, and now it's time to put them to the test and see how they work, because eventually we do need to apply them in a performance setting, and we have to take them out of practice and feel them out and see how they work, see what works for us and what might not work for us. And it's very similar, eerily similar to how we develop ourselves physically in sport and fitness.
Just staying on presentations and giving speeches and so on and so forth, what are some of the mistakes that you see presenters make when they're up on stage? What are some of the common ones?
The most common that I see you've already touched on, and that's speaking too quickly. When we get up on stage, whether that's an elevated stage or you're simply standing on the ground in front of a group of people, we feel nervous. There is nobody that is not nervous, no matter how many times you've spoke on stage or in front of people.
I agree.
When you are nervous, there is energy in your body, and that energy needs to come out. And a lot of us let that energy come out in the rate of speech. We have an idea of all of these things that we want to say, and we feel like if we don't get them out fast enough, we're going to forget something important, and the whole thing will be a failure. There's the issue with that is that mindset is very internally focused. It's all about us. I have these great ideas. I need to share them all. I need to get them out quickly because I don't want to forget. What we forget to do is that we are not there for us. We are there to help our audience in some way. And in order to help them, they need to remember what we say. And we know that people cannot remember information or retain information when it's coming at them like a fire hose. And so we need to slow down, because when we listen to people who take long pauses or they pause purposefully in silence, they give us time to reflect on what they're saying. And we need that time of reflection, because that's when we start to put their point into a narrative format, which is how we keep things and store things in long-term memory. If the speaker talks too fast, and let's say they say something that I was really drawn to, but they continue to speak, I have to make a decision as the listener. I have to say, okay, do I ignore what they're continuing to say so that I can just focus and reflect on what they just said, which I connected with? Or am I too afraid that I'm going to miss something more important that I'll just hope that I remember what they said and continue to listen? Because we cannot multitask. Multitasking was never a term that was meant to be applied to how humans work. It was an engineering and a computing term. So as a speaker, as you mentioned already, one of the first areas for improvement is simply to slow down. And the way you do that is when you reach a natural break in a sentence. So if you were to be writing what you were saying, anywhere that you would possibly put a comma or a period, that's a place that you need to stop talking and be quiet for between 1 and 5 seconds.
Jenny, and I'm included here as well, something I had to work on myself was saying a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when you're listening to somebody, be it on a podcast or be it on stage, for example, and they're saying you start to focus on that. You start to count them in a way. How would one be able to stop saying something like or some other people will have other words that they fill in? How do you work on that?
Mm-hmm. What's interesting about what I call non-words, or most people call filler words, is I heard an analogy once, and they said that it's the verbal equivalent of clearing your throat. Non-words add zero value to what you're saying, and the reason why we use them is, and there is a good reason. If you think about speaking in a one-on-one conversation, we use non-words to essentially hold our place in line. Because we know that if we pause for too long without saying something, that the other person we're communicating with will see that as an invitation to jump in and talk. But when we're communicating in a group setting, if you pause for 3 to 5 seconds, no one is going to jump in and start delivering your presentation for you. So there's no need for non-words in a one-to-group setting. I also want to note that non-words aren't a death sentence. We are all going to have them. I have them, and I'm sure you do too, Allistair. The problem happens when we use them so often that, as you mentioned, the audience becomes distracted by them, and they're starting to tally how many times we say like, how many times we say and now that means that they're no longer listening to our message, and that's a problem. The way that I coach people to eliminate non-words is it involves a skill with eye contact. So I'm gonna blend the two here. When you are speaking to a group of people, most of us do something called scanning, where we move our eyes restlessly over the entire group. I coach people not to do that, and you'll read this in a lot of communication or presentation skills books. Instead, you need to be having one-on-one conversations amongst the group. What that means is that when I'm ready to begin speaking, I find someone in my audience, I look them directly in the eyes, and I deliver my first thought or sentence to that person. When I get to a place that I have that natural break and I can pause, I pause in silence, and I hold my silence until I can move my eyes around and lock in to begin a new one-on-one conversation with someone else. So when we think about where filler words happen, they almost always happen in transitions between thoughts and sentences or at the end of thoughts and sentences. And so instead of coaching people to try to acknowledge and eliminate non-words, I instead have them replace it with the habit of this eye contact skill. So when you're done speaking with someone, you stop talking, you hold your silence, and you don't allow yourself to begin speaking until you're looking someone else in the eyes. That silence that you use replaces what would have been a filler word. And also, when we look people in the eyes, we're much less likely to use filler words. It's rare that you're looking at someone and you consistently, right to their face.
That's true.
So I think eye contact and filler words go hand in hand. And so I think it's a daunting task to tell people to try and eliminate filler words. Instead, I don't acknowledge eliminating them. I simply try and teach them a new skill that will take care of it for them.
Well, I tell you what, Jenny, I'm actually presenting in Croatia next weekend. And that is definitely the one thing I think I'm going to work on. What you just mentioned there now is having that conversation with, choosing somebody in the audience and then moving to the next. So I think that's going to be the one thing I'm going to focus on next week. So that was some great advice there. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah, you're welcome. And I want to highlight another reason why that's helpful. When we speak to people, groups or otherwise, we get nervous. But we experience one-on-one conversations more often than we're delivering one to group. And in one-on-one conversations, we feel confident because we do it a lot. And so if you can replicate that scenario in a group setting, you will feel more calm and you'll feel more in control of what you're saying. And this is not just for presenting. When I'm coaching groups in fitness, this is exactly what I do. I make eye contact with one person. I speak to them. I hold my silence until I'm locked in with eye contact with someone else, and then I pick right back up with what I wanted to say, and it works beautifully. And when people see you making eye contact with individuals in your audience, yes, you're not looking at them, but they feel equally as engaged, and they're excited for you to get to them when you're looking and speaking at them. There's a lot of benefits to doing it.
No, that's great advice, Jenny. Let's talk about professionalism. I mean, you especially work in the health and fitness industry, and you talk about professionalism a lot. What does it mean to be a professional?
Mm-hmm. I think there's been a lot of big changes in the fitness and maybe the sport industry as well over the last 10 years that you can now retire from a career in fitness, which 10, 15 years ago, people would have laughed if you said this is my career as I'm a trainer, but you can do that now. And with that means that we need to elevate the reputation of the industry, and we can only do that by elevating the professionalism of the individuals within the industry. When I think about professionalism, there are 6 components that I believe define what it means to be a professional. The first is that you treat all people with respect and dignity. The second, you're competent at your job. And that simply means that you have the technical knowledge and skills in order to successfully perform what's asked of you in the role of your job. The third is that you're reliable. You show up on time, you do what you say you're going to do, and you honor your commitments. 4, the professionals that I've met, they practice humility. Too many of us have this sense or aura of superiority, and the problem with that is when we operate out of a place of superiority, like we know more or we're better than someone, it makes all of our relationships and interactions worse. Whereas when we are able to practice out of humility, it improves our relationships and it improves our ability to deliver our service or product in the way that it was intended to be delivered. Number 5 is that your physical appearance or your dress shows self-respect, and it tells the people that you're working with that you respect them as well. So I'm wearing appropriate clothing, I'm groomed, and then finally the last one is that you're genuine and sincere. There are so many people who I've met that it's like they're faking sincerity, and you can tell it from the minute you meet them. And it's completely off-putting. And so I think to be genuine and sincere, that you do have to be so self-aware, and you have to spend time in your private time really trying to understand who you are, what you value, and then interacting with people in a way that allows those values to be shown and for you to act on them.
Yeah. Now, obviously, there's going to be quite a lot of people listening to this from the fitness industry, sports industry, etc. And one you just mentioned there about being professional in the way you appear, the way you dress, for example. And I know this is something that Michael Boyle speaks a lot about as well. And you know, I've learned so much from Michael. In fact, he's probably one of my one of the mentors I've used the most in learning in the industry together with Mark Verstegen. But I love how he talks about, you know, looking professional when you're, you know, a trainer, when you're on the floor. You know, don't have your hat backwards, and, you know, guys don't be wearing vests and so on and so forth, or you know, they call them vests in Europe, but what do they call them here in the United States?
Jacket?
No, cut off sleeves and so on. You know what I mean?
Got it. Yes.
And when I talk at conferences, and like I said, next week I'll be speaking on these things as well. Usually I'll get a little bit of a backlash from people that might dress like that, and they want to know why, and so on and so forth. So, you know, what's your opinion on that, Jenny? How does a trainer look professional? Mm-hmm. What does that look like?
when I answer this question, the first thing I always ask is, what's your goal in having this job? And the response I usually get is to make money or to make a living and to train people. So you're in a customer service business. Now, the fitness industry is huge. You can't go anywhere without having a number of trainers or fitness professionals to choose from. And when we look at, if you were to put a lineup of fitness professionals together, the first thing that people notice about us is the way that we dress and the way that we groom ourselves. And if you are someone who wears baggy clothes or you wear hardly any clothes at all, that element is distracting from the message that you're trying to share. And so if you come in and don't have a shirt on and you've got workout shoes on and shorts and you're going to teach a class, you not wearing that shirt is distracting to people. And when they're paying attention to what you're wearing, or you're wearing baggy clothes and you don't look professional, they're paying attention to that as opposed to listening to what you're saying. And if that goes on long enough, it shows very little respect for the people that you're working with, because they think, well, he couldn't even get in the shower, or she couldn't even put on a shirt today to meet with me. And when they feel like that, if there's any moment in which someone feels like they take offense to what you're wearing, which a lot of people won't even tell you that it's offensive, they'll just go find someone new to work with. That's what happens. And there's plenty of other people for them to go and work with. And so there's not scarcity in the industry to choose from, and knowing that we have to be at the very top of our game and do things that other people in the industry aren't doing. And one of those areas that I think there's still a lot of room for improvement is the way that we dress. So it also, I think, as you know, it depends on the type of clients you want to work with. If you want good clients and you want to charge a premium for your services, you need to look like you deserve to be paid that amount of money. And that's what a professional does. It's exactly as Michael Boyle says, why lawyers don't wear cutoffs into the courtroom. They dress in a suit for a reason, because it conveys an aura of confidence and command.
Staying on professionalism, how does communication impact a coach's success?
I love to think of success the way that John Wooden defined it, which it's the peace of mind that, or you did the very best that you could to become the best that you are capable of becoming. So when I think about communication's role for a coach's job is to help clients or athletes realize what they are capable of becoming and then walk with them on that path as they move to get there. And if I'm doing that, I need to establish a relationship of trust and confidence. And in order to do that, I need to first make a good impression. So that's back where the dress comes. I then need to be able to communicate in a way that conveys that I'm confident and that they can rely on me. And a lot of that comes from the basic communication skills, which we touched on, the physical and vocal. But coaching success is built on the quality of the relationships that we have. And what are relationships built on? Communication. So at the very bottom of all of this, the foundation is your ability to effectively communicate so that people can trust you, you're credible, they feel safe in developing those skills that they have with you. And once you've got that relationship established, then you begin to see the product or the fruits of your labor with them. I actually read a story yesterday that I thought was helpful in understanding the coach's role in all of this. And it was, if I have a minute, I'll just tell it quick. The Apache tribe, in the Old West, they attacked an army camp. And while they attacked the camp, they found the paymaster safe. And so they knew that there was valuables in it, but they didn't know how to open a safe because they had never seen a safe before. They took it back to their camp and they were hitting it with rocks. They roasted it in a fire. They hit it with a tomahawk. They tried gunpowder, soaking it in a river, but nothing worked to open this safe. So the chief had an idea and he said, let's push it over the cliff, and surely when it hits the ground, it's going to bust open and we'll be able to see what's inside. But of course, that didn't work, and a wheel broke off, and that was it. They decided to just let it go and sit there. A few weeks later, the army that they took it from found the safe, and of course, they knew the combination, so they opened it, and they were able to find the gold inside. And what that means is that as a coach, it is your responsibility to figure out what the combination to the safe is, because what's inside is where the value is. And without communication skills, we're going to be just like the Apache. We're going to be hitting things with tomahawks, trying all of these ways to get in and build trust that aren't going to work, when really what it came down to is our ability to effectively communicate and resonate with the individual client or athlete that we're working with.
That actually takes me on to the next point about adapting. I mean, you mentioned the word adapt earlier in the conversation, and one thing I'm fascinated about is obviously with the generations. And as we know, this generation today, they want shorter information, bite-sized information, for example. How does one adapt their communication skills to, for example, speaking to a different generation, for example? Because if I can just go further there, if we're looking at baby boomers, for example, they like to have a story. They like, they like to chat, have small chat, if you like, beforehand, before you get into, maybe the point of the meeting. As we're this generation, or I talk about this generation, it could be Z generation, it can be millennials, for example. We like to get to the point. How does one adapt their style of communication?
The key word there is adapt, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach to communication. And the easiest way to say it is that you need to let the people that you're interacting with take the lead and show you how they want to be communicated with. But from a generational standpoint, we have to think people 50 plus, they are not usually on social media. They haven't been they were exposed to a different form of communication before technology had all these advancements. And so we need to prioritize face-to-face communication with, I would say, individuals that are 50 plus. And not only that, obviously there are exceptions to every rule, but that is how we can resonate with them. And then when we think about younger generations and people who are on Twitter and all these apps, as you said, they demand us to get to our point. And so I think that in itself is the answer, is that when you communicate, too many of us say whatever comes to the top of our head immediately, instead of reflecting on what exactly do I want? What is the objective that I'm trying to achieve by communicating with this person or the group of people? Because I need to know my end goal in order to determine the best way to go about getting there. But too many of us kind of try and figure it out as we're talking through the communication. So if you want to be to the point, it requires taking time to think and reflect, and that happens in your personal time. It happens outside of being on or in a performance setting. Because just because technology is moving so fast and social media and all of these things are demanding us to communicate constantly, it doesn't mean that we need to just put out everything that comes to the top of our heads either. And so I think we need to pay attention to, who am I communicating with? How are they interacting with me? Do I notice that every time I call them, they don't answer their phones, but they'll text me back right away? Okay, then I probably should be texting with them. If I email them and every time I email them, they pick up the phone to call me, then they probably want to be talked to on the phone. And then conversational skills, I think, are universal, and they go across any generation, because yes, the younger generation is on social media and they want things quick and fast, but we're all human beings and we crave attention from other people, and we crave people showing interest in us. And the only way we do that is through meaningful conversation. And so even if I'm coaching a 12-year-old, I'm not just only going to communicate with them on social apps or in text messages. I'm going to find and make the time to ensure that I can have conversation with them, because that's also, as a coach, it's your responsibility to make sure that they know how to communicate in that way, because that's at the heart of sports success, especially if you play on a team. You need to know how to communicate and have conversation with teammates. That's how we problem solve. And I think it's a dying art, and that scares me. The inability to have a meaningful conversation is scary, because if we lose that, we lose a lot of what has made us who we are. And just because technology is changing doesn't mean that our communication should change. And I don't think it's meant to.
Let's go on to emails, because that's something where I find, well, from my personal experience, I'll open up an email, and the first thing I'll do is I'll scroll down to see how long that email is and to see if I really want to read that email. And usually, if it's probably more than half a page, I'm going to be the first one that puts my hand up and says, well, maybe my attention span isn't that great either. But I'll usually say to myself, well, I don't have time to read that. I'll read that later, which sometimes can be dangerous because it goes down the order of your emails and you might not see it. What is the best way to construct an email, or does that depend on who you're sending it to?
Yes, it absolutely depends on who you're sending it to, but there are some guiding principles that apply across the board, no matter who you're talking to, and it starts with the subject line. Many of us do a poor job of maximizing what the subject line is meant to be. And when you send an email, if the reader looks at the subject line, they should be able to tell what's required of them and the topic of the email. That should be clear. So, for instance, if you're asking somebody to schedule a phone call with you, the subject line should say, schedule call, and then colon, and then write the topic of what that call is going to be about. So right away when they receive the email, they say, okay, they're looking for me to take action on this because I need to schedule a call. So that right away at least settles them in knowing that you're organized and that you've got a plan. The second thing is that as soon as you address them at the top of the email, within the first 250 characters, they should know what your point is or the purpose of the email, and they should know what you want them to understand or do about it. We read emails in what's called an F format, the letter F like Frank. And if you think about how the capital letter F looks, the very top horizontal line is the longest. Then there's a second line in F that's half the size of that first line, and then it just goes straight down from there. So what that means, if we think about this conceptually, when people read an email, they will almost always read the first paragraph in full, with their full attention. The second paragraph, they read about half, with half their attention, and then anything after that, they just skim through. Too many of us leave our most important points until the bottom of the email, and then we wonder why, when they respond, they didn't answer any of our questions.
Yep.
So the most important principle I tell people when it comes to email is put your message up front. Within the first 250 characters, say, I'm writing on this topic and this is what I want you to know or do. And that sets the stage. And then they can say, okay, this deserves my full attention. I'm going to read the full email. Or, okay, at least I know what I'm supposed to do about this. Let me skim through and find the important points. But then nothing was lost in translation. The third thing is, so we have the subject line and we have the message up front. The third thing is to use the appropriate tone for your reader. A lot of people email everybody and they use the exact same tone for everybody. So either you're casual or formal and there's no change at all. Our tone should vary based on who we're communicating with. If I have a casual, friendly relationship with someone, that can come through in the word choices I choose to use. I could avoid signing my name at the bottom at all because it's so casual. But if I'm emailing someone that I've never met before, and that is my first impression with them, I need to be a little bit more formal and give them the respect of saying, we don't have a relationship established yet, but here is the type of professional I am, and I'm going to give you the respect of assuming that this is how you want to be communicated with. And then when they respond, again, you take their lead. Let them guide you on how the rest of the communication is going, but always err on the side of being formal, more formal than less formal. Right? You don't want to be the one underdressed. They say always dress either at or above the level of your audience. Don't send an email and be underdressed. Raise the expectations of everybody. I think when we behave like professionals and we do things, people elevate themselves to that level, and that is how we're going to elevate the entire industry, is to bring everyone along with us, and that starts at the individual level.
Let's talk about, obviously, emails where you might be angry, for example, and we all know that it's a bad time to write an email or a text when you're angry. What are some tips there? For example, if you're writing to a company with regards a complaint or something you're not happy about, do you have any tips there with regards how you would communicate that?
Mm-hmm. The first thing you should do is leave the to field where you would put their email address. Don't fill that in until you're absolutely ready to send.
I like that.
So write the email, be as emotional as you want to be, but do not enter an email address in there because, God forbid, if you hit send and you realize that it was going to be a mistake, at least if there's no email in there, it's not going anywhere. The second thing, which is a principle I follow, is too many of us, because we use email so frequently, we think of email as a private form of communication, and it is not. As we see in the media and with public figures all the time, at any point an email can be made public. I think this is especially important now. We have to remember that at any point, once we put something in writing, it is there forever. And so if you are writing an emotional email, it's not to say that you shouldn't, but if you do, write it, don't enter anything into the to field, sleep on it for 24 hours, come back and edit it. If at that point you still feel like it needs to be sent, then send it. And I would guess more often that 24 hours and you sleep on it, you'll wake up and say, there's no need to send this. But it's not to say that the conversation doesn't need to be had. Emotional conversations almost always, unless you seriously cannot help it, need to be had in person or on the phone, not over email. Because in email, no matter how much punctuation we use, people cannot read our tone. We are so misunderstood in email, and so email needs to be reserved for more simple, informational information that has no nuance or complex or emotional tie to it. Email is not the place to do those sorts of things.
Jen, you just spoke there about doing it on the phone, for example. What are some tips there with regards, for example, being in a heated, let's call it a heated argument, but being emotional on the phone, for example. So another example again is phoning a complaints line, or at the moment, for example, I've been dealing with the airlines, and it's obviously a very challenging time for everybody. But how do you deal with that when you're feeling a little hot under the collar, if you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. If I'm on the phone with somebody and I'm angry about something and let's say I'm calling to complain, we need to remember that the person that's on the other end of the phone did not personally do this to us. And you can be angry, and a lot of times anger is warranted, but I think it also needs to be said aloud to the person, and I do this personally as I say, I want you to know that I feel angry, but I understand that you did not do this personally. I need you to listen to me and try and help me. And almost always then now the person feels empathy with me. They realize that I'm not there to personally attack them, because I know if my long game is to, let's say, get a refund on airfare, me berating the customer service person on the phone is likely not going to get me to my end goal. It's fruitless, and it's just an ego stroke. I need to play the long game. So then instead I just say, I'm angry. I know this is not personal. You didn't do this to me, but I'm hoping that you can help me. You can listen to me and help me. And right away then you make this person a partner. And they say, okay, I know that they're not going to personally attack me. They're not going to make me feel like I can't do my job. All they're looking for is someone to help, and they're much more apt to help you. We feel justified in our anger, and it is okay to be angry, but I also think a lot of us need to do a better job of having the confidence to say and take responsibility for our emotions and say, I'm feeling angry. Here's the reasons why I'm feeling angry. How can you help me?
Some great advice, really. Because speaking from obviously experience as well, I would, before I would not handle calls well, and still something I do get challenged about. It's almost like that person raises their voice and you start to raise your voice as well. And then, when I'll get off the call, I'll be like, oh, why didn't I just handle that differently? So, no, some really good advice there.
Obviously, and I think you can write down what I do before, if I'm going to have an emotional conversation, I write down in one single sentence what my objective is. And I keep it in front of me and I look at it as I'm having the conversation, because what that does is every time the person raises the intensity of the conversation. I look down at that paper and I think, if I follow along, like they're guiding me into a territory that is not likely going to help me achieve this objective. So I need to just focus on the long game.
Good advice. Obviously, I want to be respectful of your time, Jenny. I mean, I could speak to you for 3-4 hours, so and have a ton of questions for you. But staying with that, you put out a tweet. I think it was last week. And again, Jenny's Twitter handle is Jenny_Rearick for any of you out there that want to follow her. You put a tweet out there saying a 3-step process for interacting with difficult people. What is that 3-step process?
So the first step is that I'm of the personal opinion that we need to stop thinking about people as difficult people. What that does is right away it sets us up that everything that person says from then on out is going to go through this filter that we've put up of them being a difficult person, and we're almost always going to react defensively, which is not helpful to them or us. And so I think we need to get away from calling people difficult people. The second thing is that when people are difficult, we become defensive, and there are 2 reasons for that. It's because almost always we feel like they're threatening our authority and that they don't have the quote-unquote right to do that. Or the second thing is that difficult people are usually people who challenge us and they ask us a lot of questions, and those questions aren't always questions we know the answer to. And so from an ego perspective, we don't like that either. And so we see them as a threat to us. But a book that I had read was saying that difficult people are the people who built America. We were built by people who constantly challenged authority and wanted to push the status quo. And that's how we need to look at people that we interact with who are challenging us, is that they don't have bad intentions, because most people, like 99% of people, are nice, reasonable people. And their curiosity and suspicion and them asking us questions is not a threat. That's a challenge to us to rise to the occasion, and it also puts a spotlight on areas that we probably need to know more about or develop within ourselves. So let's stop labeling them as difficult. Let's not look at it as a threat, but instead accept the invitation to step up and interact with them, assuming that where we're going is going to make both them and us better people. And then the last is to say thank you, because I think we need to welcome people who are difficult, again, because if we were all nice people who never challenged any of us, we would never get anywhere. Nothing would ever be accomplished. We need them. We need people who are going to make us feel uncomfortable, because if we don't, then, what fun is that going to be? It's going to be a boring world.
Yeah, exactly. Just listening to you, obviously, for the last 50 minutes or so, a lot of this really comes down to emotional intelligence, doesn't it?
Yeah, the 2 words that I use are empathy and authenticity.
Yeah.
It is. There has to be a genuine interest in being good at this stuff. It cannot be faked, and if you try and fake it, everyone knows it.
Yeah, absolutely. Jenny, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. First of all, I'm going to say, from a selfish point of view, I've learned a lot of things here that I'm going to be putting into practice. I know for next week will be the technique of catching somebody's eyes and holding their attention until I move to the next person. So that's definitely something I'm going to be doing. I'm sure our listeners will have picked up a lot as well. If there's oops, I said there. I should have just. I failed already.
All is forgiven.
Yeah. All right. If our listeners out there would like to reach out to you or follow you, what is the best way?
Yeah. So you mentioned my Twitter handle, which I'm there too, but the company that I'm operating under, that I'm putting this information out on right now, is called 9to5 Athlete. And so that's NINETOFIVE athlete.com, and my email address is the same, 9to5athlete@gmail.com. But yeah, I've put a lot of content out there. I've written a few articles, and I'm in the midst of developing a communications course for fitness and sport professionals. And so
excellent.
Yeah, if people go to my website and sign up for the newsletter, which is on the homepage, they'll be able to stay up to date on when that's going to come out. And there will be an e-learning component to it. And then also when we're able to physically be together, I want to do a practical course as well, where you're actually putting the skills into practice in real life scenarios.
Gotcha. Do you actually consult online, Jenny?
I do. I do virtual training, which I'm doing with a few individuals right now. And then I do group training. And so either on Zoom or any other way, but I train people in groups and individually, virtually, and then also when we're able to in person.
Okay, excellent. So if some of our listeners are interested in that, what is the best way to reach you? Would that be through the website again?
No, it probably just a direct email to 9to5athlete@gmail.com, and that's all spelled out, 9to5athlete@gmail.com.
Perfect. Jenny, thank you so much for taking the time, and stay safe, stay well. I know you're on the other side of the country to I am, but thanks again.
Thanks, Allistair. Let me know how your speech goes next week.
I definitely will, and if I do get it videoed, I'll probably have to edit out all the ums, Jenny.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Take care.
There you have it, guys. Thanks so much for listening to the Champion Minded podcast. I hope you enjoyed that one with Jenny on how to become a better communicator. Remember that this podcast is available on iTunes and on YouTube. Connect with me on social media on Twitter @Allistair McCall, on Instagram @BeChampionMinded, and on Facebook Allistair McCall page. All books available on Amazon. So remember, you were made for greatness. Now go do the work. Stay champion minded.